Welcome to Movie Magic. Today, we will recap the movie Passengers released in 2016. Get ready to dive into space as we break down the plot, characters, and key moments of this film. In the beginning of the movie, we see the interstellar spacecraft Avalon moving through space on its way to Homestead 2, a colonized world. Its cabins are all empty, and the ship is operating automatically. Both the 5,000 passengers and the 258 crew members are hibernating. The ship's shields are suddenly weakened when it passes through an asteroid belt. The main shield is given more power, but the ship is headed straight for a massive asteroid. The asteroid strikes the spacecraft unexpectedly, resulting in a number of faults. As the spacecraft starts its self-repair, one of the sleep pods comes into operation. Jim is a mechanical engineer. When his pod opens, an automatic system assists in reawakening him. It informs him that he has been in suspended animation for 120 years, and that the ship will arrive at Homestead 2 in just 4 months. He is informed that he can take advantage of the ship's opulent features during that period. Before he even sets foot on the planet, Jim is given instructions on his ID band, its cabin, and the main activities he must participate in. He gets ready, exits his cabin, enters an automated class intended for a full learning group, and is both excited and anxious to meet the other passengers on the ship. When the hologram describes the state of Earth's population and calls it overpopulated, Jim becomes a little nervous. Jim keeps questioning why he's the only one there, even though it says to save his inquiries for the end of the course. After realizing that the hologram is unable to respond to him, he leaves to look for other people. He arrives at the ship's main concourse. There's an automated information desk offering assistance, but no one is there either. When Jim requests to meet with a real person, a steward is sent to him. But when he discovers that no one else is present, he requests to speak with the captain. Even though he is unable to enter the bridge, he can observe that none of the major crew members are awake when he arrives there. When Jim finally visits the observatory, he discovers that Homestead 2 is actually 90 years away from the ship. Not knowing how to go back into hibernation, he realizes he got up too early and goes back to the concourse to send a message back to Earth asking what to do. He finds out from the communication system that it would take about 55 years to receive a response from the expensive call to Earth. Jim is inconsolable. As he wanders around, he comes upon the ship's bar and spots someone else there. There's something off about him as he speaks with the bartender. Jim discovers that Arthur is an android when he tries to buy him a drink. Jim is eager to learn more from him, but he is unable to even explain to the android how he could have known in advance. The following morning, Jim wakes up in his cabin and heads to the cantina, where he soon discovers that most of the menu items are exclusive to gold-class passengers. He fixes himself a simple cup of coffee and attempts to troubleshoot his hibernation chamber. Once he has obtained all the necessary tools, he successfully gets it working and lies down within the pod. However, nothing occurs. He makes the decision to enter the crew's hibernation chambers using the items he finds. That also doesn't work. There are minor faults all across the ship. Jim keeps going back to the bar, largely to chat with Arthur, but also to drink. He is persuaded to attempt having some fun on the ship by the android's advice to break into a gold classroom. Jim checks out every eatery, every game, and every entertainment system. But the more you stay there by yourself, the worse it gets. He gets wasted one day and ends up pacing the hibernation pods until he accidentally walks into an airlock housing spacesuits meant for spacewalks. Jim changes into a suit, goes to the airlock, and opens the door by pressing a lever and then a button. When he steps outside the ship, the scenery enthralls him. He is the sole living individual experiencing that particular point in time. Feeling disappointed, Jim lets go of the magnets on his boots and floats in space. Returning inside, he removes the suit but leaves it on and heads back to the airlock. As he pulls the lever to end it all, he suddenly changes his mind, dashes back inside, and trips over a bottle. Jim gets to his feet and finds himself captivated by Aurora, a woman in one of the pods. After listening to her passenger interview and looking over her files in the directory, he falls in love with her. He is then spotted sitting close to her pod, continuing to listen to her interviews. He's reading some of her writing back in the pub and discussing it with Arthur. The irony of his circumstances, waking up early and not making it to his destination. Searching for his ideal woman only to discover that she is out of reach causes him to become fixated. Jim can't stop thinking about her and begins to feel compelled to rouse her up as well. He discusses it with the robot, but he is unable to grasp the dilemma. He would be leaving her there to perish on the ship if he woke her up for his own gain. At first, Jim decides against it. But as time passes, he finds it difficult to let go, up until the day he decides otherwise. He makes it to her pod and turns it on. He hides and retreats to his room when she awakens and goes through the same motions as he did. He heads to the main concourse a little while later in the hopes of locating her. And there she is, no more clear-cut than he was a year earlier. Jim brings her to the observatory and tells her they are the only ones awake. Then he informs her that he is unable to contact the ship's primary commands or the crew. When Aurora becomes alarmed, she wants to return to her pod. When they arrive, Jim informs her that they are stuck and that the spacecraft does not have any specific equipment that would enable them to go back to sleep. Returning to the concourse, he advises her to recuperate, as she has just emerged from hibernation. She is sad that he had to spend over a year by himself aboard the ship. Jim returns to the pub with a sense of regret for his actions. He requests that Arthur keep Aurora's identity a secret from him. Aurora awakens the following day. Returning to the concourse, she inquires about the hibernation pods with the automated information desk. Jim meets her there as well, and they head out for breakfast. The information desk malfunctions of some kind as they are leaving. Jim has been eating the same breakfast for over a year, and Aurora in the cantina notices this and gets him one of the gold-class menus. While they discuss the prospect of mending the pods, Aurora isn't prepared to give up. Unlike Jim, she looks through study papers, the infirmary, and finally the crew's hibernation rooms, where she attempts to force the doors open. Jim finds further issues with the ship as a whole. After a while, Aurora bemoans her existence on the Avalon. She writes, swims in the pool, and jogs around the ship while being increasingly conscious of her surroundings. Thinking that Jim's story might be intriguing, she goes to the cantina to interview him. Why did he come to the colony? She wonders. Jim initially responds with company platitudes, but he goes on to say that he hopes to make a name for himself and start a family in the new world. When they eventually arrive at the observatory, Aurora finally reveals why she is there. She has a round-trip ticket. Unlike the other passengers aboard the ship, she had the brilliant notion to visit Homestead 2, stay there for a year, and then return to Earth to become the first journalist to do so, writing the best story that had ever been written. As Aurora gradually loses hope in solving their current situation, Jim finds a means to make her feel better. He brings her to the movies, the basketball court, and dancing. Finally, he brings her to meet Arthur at the bar. She unwinds for a while before recalling their circumstances. Feeling terrible about what he's done to her, Jim is left alone with the robot. In one, he is seen fiddling with something, and in the other, Aurora enters the observatory and discovers a model of the Chrysler building that he had built for her. They go on a date at the bar after a while. Over dinner, they converse about their personal experiences. Her father passed away when she was a teenager. She informs him. Jim brings Aurora to the airlock after supper so they can put on their spacesuits. Together, they take a spacewalk. Jim may now finally tell someone about that amazing encounter. Jim turns off the magnets in their boots, causing them to levitate in space together. After returning inside, they share a kiss, go to his cabin, and spend the night together. They soon begin living together as a couple. Moving into his stateroom, Aurora begins writing about her time on the ship. They share meals, sleep, and jog together. Jim discovers the hydroponics bay as he continues to investigate the ship. He brings flowers to Aurora. They visit the observatory to view a red giant that the ship passes by one day. Later that evening, they celebrate Aurora's birthday at the bar, and then at one of the ship's various restaurants. While Aurora remains in the bar, speaking with Arthur, Jim uses the restroom to get ready for the ring he designed for her. The android, not realizing he was still keeping it a secret, informs Aurora that Jim purposefully woke her up. When Jim reappears out of nowhere, Jane approaches him in complete shock. Enraged and terrified, she fled. When Jim returns to his cabin, everything she'd owned has vanished. The following day, he bumps into her in the cantina, but as soon as he says anything, she takes off. Aurora is in a panic. She visits Jim's cabin one night and starts hitting and kicking him because she wants to murder him. Jim tries to explain his conduct and apologize to her over the phone while she continues to avoid him. Aurora doesn't seem to care that he told her he fell in love. She is unable to forgive him for killing her. While Jim is in his cabin one night, there is still another issue. The main command shuts down when the spacecraft encounters a critical error. When he enters the elevator later, it breaks down. Jim has planted a tree in the main concourse, which Aurora notices as she enters. She then visits the cantina, where there is a faulty food dispensary. Abruptly, they both hear the deck chief's voice on the comms, inquiring as to who planted the tree. Jim's tree is in front of Gus Mancuso when they both dash into the concourse. They greet the chief and inform him of the circumstances. How 3 pods could go bad is beyond him. When Mancuso brings them to the bridge, he finds that there is a problem with the spacecraft, but that manual verification of the data on the systems is required. They warn Mancuso that there have been more frequent problems throughout the ship when a robot nearly falls on their heads as they exit the bridge. As he demonstrates to them how to get the data, he says that shouldn't occur. Jim joins Mancuso at the pods where he checks on them. He knows what transpired with Aurora's pod. The deck chief thinks Jim did a terrible thing. Later, Aurora joins him at the bridge, where he is reviewing the gathered data. They discuss what transpired with her pod, but he informs her that there is nothing he can do. Jim enters carrying the 16th damaged robot. Mancuso goes to bed after getting the hibernation illness, but on his way out, he coughs up blood. When Aurora can't sleep that night, she takes a swim. The ship experiences a sudden loss of gravity, causing the pool's water to travel with her as she begins to drown. She narrowly survives when the gravity drive resets. While searching for Mancuso, they cross paths with one another. Returning to the bridge, the 3 of them are gradually learning what has been happening with the ship. Mancuso discovers that a significant system was destroyed 2 years ago due to an incident. The entire ship is trying to take up the slack. Therefore, they need to identify and address the root of the problem. The whole ship will be stuck if they don't fix it. Mancuso passes out as they search for the issue, so Jim and Aurora take him to the hospital. There is nothing that can stop him from dying or extend his time on this earth. He instantly dies when Mancuso gives him his ID bracelet and orders them to fix the ship when the 3 of them finally get together in the observatory. Abruptly, the ship begins to tremble as the lights turn a frightening crimson. After telling Aurora that he needs her assistance, Jim and Aurora rush for engineering. But the gravity drive experiences yet another malfunction. And right away, another one hits Arthur as well. Jim turns him off. When they do make it to engineering, they begin to search for the issue. When they open the hatch after discovering it inside the power plant, Aurora is drawn inside. There is a hole in the hull made by the asteroid. Jim is also drawn in, but he manages to escape by holding onto the hatch as it continues to close. He eventually gets drawn in as well, but they are able to shut the door in a flash. Jim discovers there are other hull breaches as soon as he solves that issue. After tracking the meteor's path, the 2 discover that it struck the reactor control computer. Jim believes he can locate spare parts for it. Even when they locate and replace the part, the reactor's venting procedure still fails. They attempt it by hand, but it keeps failing. Jim discovers that in order to cool the reactor, he must open the vent door from the exterior of the spacecraft. They head to the airlock together, and as he prepares to leave, he gives Aurora Mancuso his bracelet because he might not return. After assisting him with the suit, she tells him to return since she cannot survive aboard the ship without him as he enters the airlock. After reaching critical temperatures, Aurora returns to the reactor. Jim notices the door as he approaches the vent from the outside, and a bolt from the reactor shoots into her arm. As he tries to open the vent door by circumventing it, the temperature in the reactor room rises. Before long, he tells Aurora that he will need to physically hold the door open to allow the reactor to vent. He tells her to vent the reactor even if she doesn't agree with the strategy. They quarrel because she doesn't want him to die, but he convinces her that they must save the others, so she lets off the reactor. The procedure works, but Jim is pushed away and loses his tether by the reactor's fumes. His suit's pressure is also decreasing. After he tells Aurora what occurred, she rushes to change into a new suit so she may bring him in. He offers her another apology. Unfortunately, her tether is too short, so she had to wear a suit and fly out to fetch him. She's drawn away, but then she manages to bring him in by grabbing onto his leash. When Aurora takes Jim to the hospital, she learns that he has passed away. She resuscitates Mancuso by disobeying medical regulations and using his bracelet. Jim is revived by the medical pod, which completes the task automatically, forgiven by Aurora. Afterwards, Mancuso is given a respectable space burial when Aurora fixes Arthur. Jim informs her that he's managed to turn the medical pod into a hibernation pod as he leads her to the infirmary. He orders her to board the pod and spend the remainder of the journey inside. However, as will become clear later, she declines and chooses to remain awake aboard the ship with him. After living their entire lives on the ship, Jim eventually pops the question to her. The Avalon arrives at Homestead 288 years later. When the crew awakens, they discover the ship in an extremely strange state. In a letter to them, Aurora recounts the events of her and Jim's lives aboard the ship as the others were dozing. And that's the end of this recap. Don't forget to give us a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more. Thanks for watching and see you at the next one.